I want to respectfully disagree with my colleague from Pennsylvania, because I don't think the sky is falling. I do think we need to remember that we are suffering from two economic downturns in the past decade, 2002 and 2008. I watched as an employer and as an employee a pension plan recover from 2002 to 2008, and which seemed like losses that could not be overcome. Market returns over time slowly restored those pension plans to a much better funded status. That is not to say we should ignore this problem, but that is to say that let's not forget that a significant portion of pension plan payouts come from investment returns. It was mentioned earlier that we have three sources of revenue for pension plans: the employee, the employer, and investment returns. And about 2/3 today of the money sitting in pension plans across this country are from investment returns. In better years, that number gets closer to 85%. So we need to remember that I'm not sure when this economy is going to recover, but it is going to recover. And a few more days, well, maybe years, like yesterday, and your obligation as an employer will look markedly different than it does today. Now, people talk about what your obligation is and the millions and billions of dollars that you owe, but realistically, there is no expectation that every plan will always be 100% funded. You really don't want to be less than 70% funded, but with market fluctuations, you really should be around 70%, so as the market goes up and you're getting closer to the 100%. 100% is great, but I don't think it's ever going to be that theoretical objective that everybody is looking for. When I mentioned before about the money that's sitting in pension plans out there today, about 2/3 being from investment returns, and the other third really made up by the employer and the employee. Employee about 10%, and the employer about 24%, that piece of the pie. That basically means for every dollar that goes in, we're getting $2 in return on that investment. That is a really, really good public policy and investment of money. Let's also not forget the importance of public pension plans and the role they play in our economy. Pension plans are engaged in investment capital, and that's a mix that includes long-term investments and patient capital, something that you don't want to see, or not, well, you'd like to see a return on earlier, but not necessarily that you will see return on right away. Private equity and real estate, which require large amounts on a long-term basis. An individual investor is not going to be able to get into those kind of investments. Let's also not forget about public pension plans investing in business capital to develop products, invest in technology, and create jobs. Most public pension plans also invest a small portion into venture capital. And this venture capital is used to get companies started. High risk, high reward, but it's also a 5 to 10 year horizon, which an individual investor may not be able to afford, but has resulted in companies like FedEx, Staples, and Starbucks becoming the leaders that they are. When you want to look at providing an employee benefit and you're comparing DC and DB plans, it's important to recognize that once you figure out what it is you want to defer in compensation for your employees for when they retire, you can meet that number more cheaply with a defined benefit plan than a defined contribution plan. As a matter of fact, when you get into the economies of scale and the investment fees and all the things that go along with it, you can provide that benefit that you have pegged at about 46% lower cost. I talked a little bit about investment capital on a much larger scale for the nation's economy, but let's also talk about local economies. These retirees, these real people that we are talking about, they, by and large, remain in their local communities. So during recessions, these people and their incomes are an automatic stabilizer in those communities because they still have the resources to spend in local businesses within their communities. One example, in Colorado, the Public Employees Retirement Association paid out $2.1 million in 2009 in rural Costilla County. That accounts for 35% of the earned income in that county. That money is not flowing out there as deferred compensation for those employees. What happens to the economy in Costilla County? I also want to talk about, Keith mentioned about making sure that we have retirement security. But for those folks who do not have retirement security because they don't make enough to participate in their employer's pension plans, their poverty rates are 6 times higher for older households lacking pensions. So 4.7 million households avoided poverty or near poverty because of pension income. What that means to you as policymakers and people who have to pass budgets is that $7.3 billion was not spent in public assistance. That's a really, really good return on investment. Also, when we look at the percentage of households classified as poor and near poor, those with pensions, you tend to see the inequality drop across gender and race categories when older Americans have pensions. As an employer, we talked a little bit about why employers want to have a pension plan for their employees. It increases retention, it also reduces turnover, and in doing that, you will find that you'll reduce the onboarding costs for new employees. If people leave because they really feel like they can go somewhere else and earn more money and get better benefits, you're going to constantly be retraining those people. That's not good for kids, it's not good for the quality of education. When you talk about the kind of benefit employees are attracted to, if they have a choice, 75 to 98% of people will choose a defined benefit pension plan. If you need an example of that, West Virginia, 2008, 79% of the teachers voted to switch from a defined contribution plan to a defined benefit plan. If you want to break it out by age, even those under the age of 40, 75% made that switch. They understood the value as part of their compensation of having a defined benefit plan. Now, one of the things that I think we really do need to do is address the market concerns caused by the 2008 recession. You also need to remember, and this was briefly mentioned, simply changing plans is not going to eliminate the obligation that is already accrued. And that funding is something that every single state has to tackle, and that is not going to go away just because we change the benefit structure. So we know that defined benefit is cheaper to administer. We know it's a better recruitment tool for employees. But what are we going to do about the problem at hand? In Pennsylvania, it was mentioned we did pension reform a couple years ago. I was head of the largest union in the state at that time. I worked with the other unions to come to the table to talk about stabilizing the pension plan in Pennsylvania. It wasn't an easy conversation for our members to have. It wasn't a easy conversation for union leaders to have. But we came to the table and worked on realistic changes to the plan, reserved defined benefit for everyone, made some changes around the edges, made some commitments to funding and collars to slowly get ourselves back on track with a commitment from the current governor and legislature, which they are meeting that commitment, slowly ratcheting up, and also depending on market returns to help get us out of this mess. I want to end on a mental picture for you because we often think about pensions and the people aren't real. I'd love to give you an example for every state, but I'll just pick one, and that is Maryland. So the average teacher retiree in Maryland is age 61 when he or she retires, with 22 years of service, and earns an annual pension of $18,000. A support personnel, the custodian, the bus driver, the secretary, those folks. Average age is 61 as well, with 19 years of service, and earns an annual pension of $11,700. That pension is the difference between retirement security and dignity, and not. Thank you very much for having me here today.